We are bringing up the caboose here, I'm aware. Thank you for being with us. Excited for this morning. We are a team from Duke Divinity School from the Theology, Medicine, and Culture Initiative, and we'll introduce ourselves here in a sec. And we're here to talk about scriptural and theological perspectives on the communal nature of health. I'm Martha Carlo. I'm consultant faculty with TMC and a family physician. I feel like this is reverberating. Is it true? What can we do about that? Hold it closer? I don't think so. Is that better? Maybe? Is that better? Okay. Yes, I'm a family physician and consultant faculty with the Theology and Medicine and Culture Initiative.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sophia Sparrow. I am a current second-year Master's of Theological Studies student at Duke Divinity, and will be applying to med school next year.
Good morning. I'm Mark Landon. I'm just finishing up the TMC hybrid program, which has been fantastic. And I am the Director of Advocacy and Care at a medical clinic counseling center in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Hey, all. I'm Brett McCarty. I'm the TMC's Associate Director of Theological Ethicist and Qualitative Researcher, and a grateful friend to all these good folks.
Thanks. Okay, I'm going to kick this off by sort of establishing a common understanding of what we're talking about here, the idea of health not just limited to individuals and single interactions, but including the community. And then we'll talk through particularly some strengths of the Catholic social teaching movement and also liberation theology that might help us inform that. And then both Mark and Brett will help us examine scripturally some texts which can provide some theological framing on this. I'd like to claim that this all started with Christianity and Christians taking care of each other, but no, way prior to that, ancient Egypt had great modes of agriculture, feeding lots of people. Probably the first public hospitals were actually in India, and China figured out sewage and water long before anybody else. And then with the beginning of the Hippocratic movement, there was a sense that health was not just about the one person, but like the sort of miasma, bad air, which is actually important because many churches sort of held on to the idea of bad air being part of how diseases were spread long after there was scientific evidence that that wasn't really true. Hebrew Mosaic law about 1000 BCE stressed the prevention of diseases through commitment to personal hygiene and community. And then for the first 1,000 years or so after Christ, a lot of healthcare was really provided in churches and monasteries. Many physicians were actually monks, and monasteries had a very well-developed structure of caring for those who were impoverished and ill and along trade routes. And it wasn't until the papal rulings at a Lateran Council, this Lateran Council in 1215, when it became mandated that priests actually not touch blood and clerics not be in medical work, that a lot of medical care shifted to secular practices. So there is some good Christian history, although it didn't start with us. Over the centuries, the church has continued to provide important contributions to communal health. Even now, more than 50% of hospitals in Africa are faith-based hospitals. And if you're involved in disaster work, you'll realize how many Christian organizations are in the front lines of those kind of situations. I think of Ebola in Africa and what happened there. But unfortunately, this has gone other ways as well. The pattern has repeated sometimes that there can be stigma associated with spread of infections in communities. We know what happened with HIV/AIDS. And so the church has played both supportive and destructive roles in seeing church as seeing the community health. In the West, a lot of the first public health crises were the result of combinations of industrialization, urbanization, and poverty sort of colliding together. And in the UK in particular, as the standard of living increased and got better for many people, for the factory workers themselves, it got worse. And child mortality and adult mortality sort of plummeted. This was a situation that humanity created and actually really impacted the poor. During this era, public health became more of a government function in most of the West. And as we sort of fast forward through World War II and World War I and World War II and the founding of the UN agencies, there was a movement towards understanding structural oppression and the need to attend to structural issues as part of communal health. At the start of the 20th century, as you see in the top right picture, public health was actually strong, the idea that we care for each other. These are folks lining up for smallpox vaccines in New York. And then here we are, where we witnessed the COVID epidemic and how that was so divisive in terms of individuals supporting each other and not supporting each other in the community. There's some reasons for that, but partially there has been a shift in many ways in how public health workers themselves have seen their roles as going away from a lot of what we talk about here at CCHF, a sense of advocacy and caring for all, to becoming much more fixed on epidemiology and data management and understanding systems and taking a step back from direct involvement. And then, of course, there was concerns that actually asking people to respond in a communal way to a public health issue was a violation of a human right. That is a relatively recent issue. You may have heard of Francis Bacon, or maybe not, but he was a 16th century scholar and scientist, and he was really the first to espouse that we should, quote, call no disease incurable, and that relieving suffering was actually possible. We would learn more and more, and we would be able to relieve all suffering. And in fact, that it was a moral imperative that we do so. His investigative and experimental methodology is a lot of what is behind what many of us were schooled in health sciences schools, the fact that we can actually figure it all out. If we get enough knowledge, we will figure it all out. We can get better and better through deductive reasoning. We talk about this a lot in our circle in regards to biomedical science, but I believe as well that public health sort of has its own Baconian project, the sense that we can, through development, actually that development is an amoral good, that we can, through development, make things better for everyone, and that we should pursue that. And I just want to introduce this idea here of an inverse care law to sort of refute that sense. So a lot of the public health interventions driven by biomedical models are aimed at individual behavior patterns and can actually worsen health inequities if you can't have access to do those things, if you don't have the financial resources, if you don't have access to the healthcare systems. And in fact, if we consider some of what development has done, particularly in non-dominant world, like nutrition has actually gotten worse by development in many places. Chronic disease has actually gotten worse. So it's actually not true that a rising tide lifts all boats. We have to look at it differently than that. So this is known as the inverse care law. There are ways in which interventions can, broadly applied, can actually increase inequities because those who are most likely to access them are those with resources. For Christians, we have a different mandate. The social dimensions of flourishing are central and include the structural elements needed to do this, include looking to those in the margins. And I'll just put both of these quotes before you. John Sobrino was a Guatemalan Jesuit who worked in many disasters and also in the war in Guatemala and El Salvador. And his quote, "We have to admit that the current system is not working. The same world that allows a measure of health and freedom for me results in death and poverty for others," is something I hold on to remind myself of this sense that it's not getting better for all of us. And then Dr. Paul Farmer, a remarkable physician, anthropologist, and Catholic study of Catholic theology, says the idea that some lives matter than others is the root of all that is wrong in the world. So hold on to those. This connects us to two ancient points of Judaism that touch on this. The first is nephesh, which I won't talk about very much, but a sense that one life can save the whole world, that every life really does matter. And then Tikkun Olam is a movement towards repairing the world, and Farmer talked about this quite a lot. The ethical imperative to achieve better life for all requires that we go to the margins, to go to those who naturally have less. I'm not going to cover this in depth, but I think the sort of intertwining disciplines of public health, which is really about protecting all and health for everyone, population health, which has become more common in the last probably decade or so as a word and discipline out of healthcare systems for looking systematically at folks who could be patients or are patients and helping them. And community health are all intertwined. Community health really is the collective well-being of society and includes, obviously, and maybe focused on those in the margins. These three disciplines sort of intertwine and are all important. None actually fully meet the biblical model of shalom. The abundance, the embrace of those who are excluded, and including them from the beginning in the picture. So that is like a 10,000-mile look at history of public health, why only public health for all is not going to do what we believe needs to be done in the world, and help us move towards this next stage that Sophia is going to talk about in public health and flourishing.
Thank you so much, Martha, for setting us up really well. And in coming out of this context and where our Christian faith can approach public health in a way that is holistic and promotes mutual flourishing, I wanted to start off with a quote by the Latin American Episcopal Church in 1968. Is one of the, this council was one of the starting formations of Latin American theology, which started during the crises and social reformation movements in Latin America. And they had stated in response to the injustices that they had witnessed, they had said that when communities lack the necessities they need to flourish and live healthy lives, all initiative and responsibility, as well as every possibility for cultural promotion and participation in social and political life, are hindered. And I wanted to start off with this quote because, again, when we talk about what it means to have shalom and what it means to have our faith, our salvation and our sanctification is not an individual pursuit, but it is something that should call us out to reach our communities, to let it be relational and social for the betterment of all. And so, again, when we look towards how we can act faithfully in our practice as a form of worship, I found Isaiah 58 being really helpful in how it can convict us of using our own interests or our own means in healthcare, and we see through the development of the Baconian Project, we find ourselves in a place where we see the numbers, and it can be very easy to be disheartened by it. But when we focus too hard on the numbers and less on the people and the populations that they affect, we lose our moral grounding for what it means to say that the flourishing of our neighbors and for those that we care about is tied up with our own flourishing. And so I really appreciate Isaiah 58 for saying that the fasting that the Lord chooses is one that loosens the bonds of the oppressed, the ones that allows us to feed the hungry, allows us to house the unhoused, allows us to welcome the foreigner. And in doing those things, we are emphasizing that it is out of the human beings that we face in our healthcare practices, that they are made in the image of God, that they are beloved human beings, and that they are more than the statistics that we see. And that as we continue to seek them face to face, that we are reminded of their human dignity. And as we continue to kind of break down Catholic social teaching, I found a good example on where Catholic social teaching speaks to our roles in healthcare through the Good Samaritan. And with this quote, I find it helpful for us to break down the 4 principles of Catholic social teaching, one being human dignity, the second, solidarity, third, subsidiarity, and the fourth, common good. And so starting with human dignity, we can see that being said in the Good Samaritan. This is a parable during Jesus's ministry. A religious scholar asked Jesus, what does it mean to inherit eternal life? And so he responds by using the Hebrew text and saying to follow the commandment to love God and to love your neighbor. And so the religious scholar responds and says, well, what does it mean, or who is my neighbor? And I just found that really striking, because already in that question, it's limiting. It's a limiting factor to say that there's certain people that qualifies as our neighbor. And so when Jesus responds, he answers with the parable of the Good Samaritan, in which there was a man who was traveling from Jerusalem back to Jericho. And on the way, he was robbed, beaten, and left on the side of the road. And as he was there and wounded, there was a priest who walked by and did not give him care. There was a Levite who passed by and neglected seeing him as a human being worthy of care. And it wasn't until the Good Samaritan who, back in biblical times, the Samaritan was in social opposition against the Jews. So it was hard for again, with those social tensions, it's not expected for the Samaritan to help out someone who they had considered to be a Jew. But the Good Samaritan came, responded to his needs, wrapped him up with oil and bandages, carried him on his own colt, and took him to the inn and provided more for him. And so when we break that down into the frameworks of Catholic teaching, we see that the human dignity of the man on the side of the road was restored. And it is through that we recognize the injustice in being robbed and stripped, beaten and neglected. And it is not through that, if it was not for that recognition that something went completely wrong, we're dishonoring the dignity that comes in being for the person who had been on the side of the road. Solidarity. The Good Samaritan was moved with compassion to be with the man who had been wounded and beaten. And so it's one thing to be moved, but it is also another thing to act as well. And so in referring back to Isaiah 58, it should convict us to respond to the injustices that we see. Subsidiarity, meaning that when there is needs to be met, when there is gaps in healthcare or in social injustices, that it is that the lowest level of authority has the agency to respond. So in recognizing that there is systemic injustices, it can be disheartening to see those numbers, to see how our medical systems are fractured today. But given our positions in healthcare or as a social worker, or wherever you find yourself, you have, given the positions you are, there are resources available to be able to be prepared with bandages, with oil, and with wine, and to ask ourselves, what does it mean in our own context to put our neighbor on our own animal, on our own colt, and pay for his day at the end, and going even beyond. And in doing so, how can we recognize the common good in knowing that our neighbors, whether they look like us or not, that in protecting their flourishing and allowing them the capacity to be able to flourish and meet their needs contributes to the greater society's flourishing. And so when they are not bound by their own limitations, by the inaccessibility that is caused by the limitations of our healthcare systems. When we continue to turn to them and seeing their human dignity, we can respond compassionately. And I also wanted to introduce one more methodology, which is part of the liberationist theology, which is a branch from Catholic social teaching. And it is started by Gustavo Gutierrez, who is a Peruvian priest. And during the 1960s, in response to the injustices that he faced in his communities, he wanted to convict the church and convict the members of society that we must first reject the existing situations that they find themselves in, and consider the injustices as a fundamental violation of human rights, something that is dehumanizing to the good of creation and to the good of humanity. And so in doing so, it allows us to go to the root of the problems and to create new orders without compromising what has been existing, but continuing to build upon it. And this is something that would be based on justice and fellowship. And through this theology, it allows us to speak on asking these questions on who are lying wounded in our society today, and how do we change systems so that fewer people are found wounded and forgotten in the first place. And I will pass this on to Brett.
Thank you. I just want to slow down for a moment to engage with one scriptural passage in Mark 5, where we see the work of healing broadly construed on display in the life and ministry of Jesus. And this is, I want to think about healing in its cosmic, political, economic, and communal context before turning to Mark, who will attend more to our participation in the healing ministry of Jesus and our company of folks in that work. So in Mark 5, if you'll recall the passage, if you know it, Jesus and his disciples cross on a boat, and they're immediately accosted by this man who's burst out of his chains. He's stigmatized and isolated. This is where one of the great examples of, he's classically known as the Gerasene demoniac, but I actually think this is one case where person first language is actually less clunky and much better. He's a demonized man, both in the sense that demons are afflicting him and his society has demonized him by placing him in this unclean graveyard, enchained. And this cosmic showdown, this kind of classic contest, there's a question of naming. So Jesus tries to and gets out the name of the demon, who is Legion. And that term is a Latin word that would have shown up in the Greek text as a Latin word. It only meant one thing: a couple thousand Roman soldiers. Like, there was no other meaning for that word until this scriptural passage where Legion is the name of these demons. And so that immediately shifts or bridges the cosmic and the political, because there was a legion occupying that area of the land. And those soldiers actually, remarkably, the symbol of their legion, the standard was a boar. So when 2,000 pigs run over the cliff into the sea, echoing Pharaoh and Exodus and the destruction of his chariots and armies, it would have been a very clear kind of shot across the bow of the Roman occupying forces to say that this boar legion has been cast out and destroyed. And that was unsettling for some folks. I'll just put it that way. And not to mention, it was costly. I don't know if any of you have been around farming or animal husbandry, but even today, 2,000 pigs is a lot of pigs. That's a big operation. It would involve a lot of people. It would have been very stinky, a lot of money involved. And for all those pigs to run off the cliff into the ocean, to the sea, would have ruffled some feathers. Also, faithful Jews do not eat pigs. So this represented their complicity with the occupying forces, that they were selling. Soldiers love bacon. Like, they were selling these, the pigs that were kind of symbiotically bound up with their occupying forces. So for Legion to be exorcised from this man and the expulsion of this demonic horde from this area of land meant the complete restructuring and deep threat to the symbiotic status quo of the local Jewish folks and the occupying Roman forces. So healing is both cosmic, political, and economic. And it was also communal because at the end of the passage, the man is there in his right mind, clothed, and the folks from the town are told by the swineherds that, hey, wait a second, that we promised it wasn't our fault. Like, this guy Jesus came and the pigs all ran into the water and died. The townsfolk come out and they're frightened, it says, and they beg Jesus to leave, which I just think is a remarkable moment because healing is costly. It's costly in the political and economic. And they're not ready for it. They're asking Jesus, we are not looking to cast this legion of Roman forces out on our side. We kind of were happy with how things were. And if this is the cost of like being a part of what you're up to in this healing ministry, we don't want any part of it. Thank you very much. And so in a way, the kind of demonic influence, if you will, kind of claps back at Jesus. Like he gets them into the water, but then their influence still lingers and asks him to leave. So what does it mean to imagine the healing work of Jesus that we may be called to participate in as things that are immediately bound up in cosmic confrontations and political and economic battles, and that might ask things of us in our communities that we aren't yet ready to offer up. I love this German image of this biblical scene. The disciples have already seen some stuff, but still their eyes are like, whoa, what's going on here? And you see this man who's been contorted in this way. But my favorite part of the scene are the two Roman soldiers kind of slinking in the top. They're like, uh-oh, is he coming for us next? And in the top right there with the spears over the soldiers. And then the folks in the town are like, hi, bye. I think this image captures this scene of cosmic conflict, but also, and then you see the pigs being ridden by demons into the water. This scene of cosmic conflict there at the center that's redeeming a person also involves political, communal, economic elements as well in that work of healing. The final thing I'll say before handing it over to Mark is that the man, when healed, clothed in his right mind, says, hey, Jesus, can I come with you? This is pretty amazing. Jesus says, nope, stay here. Get your people. What does it mean for us to be participating in Christ's liberating, healing work, and to also be asked to stay and get our people?
Hello. So I was looking for this art, which is just beautiful. I mean, I might have even been able to draw it myself, but probably not. But I found this quote. It was sort of like a cat poster, but it was like, everybody needs 4 crazy friends. So I think that is going to be seen in the story of the paralytic. And I only have 3 crazy friends today, so if anybody would like to be my 4th crazy friend, okay, thank you. Okay, we'll talk after. I can take more than 4. That's fine. So I want to walk us through the story of Mark 2 and the story of the paralytic. It's probably a familiar story for you all. But the picture starts with the 4 crazy friends, right? And they have a friend who's paralyzed, and they must have been hearing about Jesus. They must have been hearing that there's this guy doing miracles and doing some work. And so they carry their 4 friends. The 4 friends carry their paralytic friend to Jesus, and then they get there, and it's like the first roadblock. So in the work that you do, how many times a day do you run into a roadblock? Like a fair amount, right? So first roadblock, they can't get in. There's so many people there. This does not deter them. They go up on the roof. These guys are all in. They dig through the roof, and I just would love to have been there and just seen like the crowd just around Jesus, and all of a sudden like stuff just starts falling down, and they're digging through, and then they lower the man down in front of Jesus, and Jesus says, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Which at that point, if I'm one of the 4 friends, I'm going to yell down, Jesus, it's the legs. The legs are the issue, Jesus. And but the thing is, like, we don't know always what people need. But Jesus knew that the first issue for this guy was not his legs, it was his heart. And whole person care takes that into consideration. It looks at the whole person. What do they need now? And again, we don't have the wisdom of Jesus, but guess what? Jesus is in us, so we do have the wisdom of Jesus, so we can walk in that. And so the question for us is, first of all, what are the friends of the paralytic like? We sort of already talked about it a little bit, but the first thing is that they care, right? They simply decide to care. We say at our clinic all the time, at Hope Community Clinic, we say, well, we could have cared less, but we decided to care more. And I think that's these guys. They decided to care for their friend. They very intentional in their care. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is they were collaborative. Like, not one of them by themselves could not have carried the friend to Jesus, right? And then got him up on the roof and lowered him down. They needed a team. And so there was a team approach, a collaborative approach. I think that's really important. And then we already alluded to this too. There is a level of commitment. I mean, these guys are not going to be stopped. They get there, there's a crowd, they can't get in. They get on the roof, they dig through, they lower their friend down to Jesus. So this picture of carrying somebody who needs to encounter Jesus, carrying the person to the feet of Jesus. And so I think it's an image that's helpful for us in the work that we do. We actually have the privilege and the honor to carry people and to the feet of Jesus. And so for the work that I do at Hope Community Clinic, the people that we carry to Jesus are the immigrant and refugee community. So as you can imagine, this has been a very difficult time to do that work on so many levels. I mean, Brett already mentioned some of the systemic things and the principalities and powers that we're up against. That's been very clear, but that's who we carry. And we actually redid our vision statement and since January of 2020, what year is this? 2025. We redid our vision statement, not on purpose, but we had a new CEO. And in the vision statement, we got even more bold in saying, this is what we do. We walk with immigrants and refugees towards thriving and belonging. Like, we didn't dumb it down or move it out or sanitize it for the season that we're in. But we actually doubled down on that because that's who we carry. And then how do we carry folks is an important question too. So number one, and I think all of us in the work that we do, number one is we carry people and we do small things with great love. I mean, it might just be a food referral that they just get food that day. It might be that they get a referral to a surgery that they need at no cost. So there's lots of ways it plays out, but it's little things done with great love. That is kind of the part of the how. We are always thinking whole person. Again, Jesus does that perfectly. We will never do that perfectly, but we're always thinking that way. What are the whole needs? Yesterday, I presented with one of our doctors, Jonathan Wilson, and he was talking about how 20% of the work that towards health is just done by the medical providers. And I was like, and I wanted to say to him, I'm going to say to him later, I'm like, well, if you're only 20%, shouldn't I get paid more? Because I'm the 80%. But we'll talk about that later. It'll go about as good as this joke just went. So. Where was I? Oh, how? So whole person with great tenacity. Let me give you one example of tenacity. One of our case managers, Valerie, she is one of the most tenacious people I know. She is Mexican descent. She's Mexican-American, but she loves our people. She goes after it with them and for them. And so we one day we get pulled into exam rooms for different reasons. Sometimes it's for behavioral health encouragement or for pastoral care, or just they just need there's an obstacle. There's a roof we have to dig through a little bit. So this was a situation with a lady. She came in, she said she got in a car wreck and it was months ago and the insurance company hasn't given her information and it just sort of dragging on and on. A day and a half later, Valerie had the situation settled. She just was like, she called him and was like, we're going to do this. We're doing this right now. It got fixed. Another case was that this little kid was new to the country, newcomer. He couldn't somehow get registered in school. we actually went to the school. The school's like, yeah, do this and come back later. And Valerie's like, no, we're doing this now. And the kid was registered. I'm like, she's one of my heroes. And I get to work with her. So we do it a whole person with tenacity and with great love. That's how we carry. And I want to share a couple of the stories of a little bit of what this looks like at Hope Community Clinic. So the first person I want to talk about, I'm going to talk about my holy friend up there, Ruth, in a second. But before I talk about Ruth, I want to talk about Oscar. Oscar is a good friend of mine. I've known him for probably now going on 8 years. And he is just the greatest guy. He's a man's man. He cares for his family. Has no legal documents to be in the U.S., but somehow he functions and he makes it. And he's a painter. He's just a great guy. And his family is just the sweetest family. And I've with so many of our families, I've had the privilege of being in their homes with them, eating with them. Just sharing life with them. So as these sort of oppressive powers start impacting our families, like these are my people. These are my family. Like I am not the oppressed person, but I stand with them. I walk with them. And Oscar one day, again, he's always positive. He's always happy. But we were sitting in front of our clinic, and we had all heard news that the Border Patrol was coming to Charlotte. And this was on a Friday, and we knew they were coming on Sunday. And we just sat there on the front porch of the clinic, and he's like, and we're talking everything Spanish, but he's like, Mark, I don't know why they hate us. He's like, all I've done since I've been here is I've worked and taken care of my family and paid my tax. He's like, I don't know why they hate us. And he started getting teary. And you want to talk about a moment for me? Because I'm like, this is a man's man. This is not like a softie, like I'm the softie, but he was like getting teary. And I was like, this is so wrong. And yet we connected there, and we actually were at that moment starting to carry each other. Ruth is pictured there. She's one of my other heroes. Ruth, she has a faith that is hard to put into words. She lived in Venezuela. She one day is praying, and she said the Lord told her to go to the United States. So go to the United States. So what does she do? She takes her father, who's about 60, and her son, and they start walking. And they walk the whole trip through Venezuela to the Darien Gap, which you've probably heard of, which is actually considered impassable jungle, but people get through it. Walked all the way. She told so many miraculous stories. First one is she's in the jungle, and the jungle's enough, right? And bandits come out, and bandits are like, we need $50 per person if you want to keep going. And she's like, they only had $50 for all they had was $50 for all three of them. So she's like, hey, Jesus, you told me to come. What am I supposed to do? And she heard Jesus say, like, just go up and tell them you're a Christian and you're supposed to go through. So she just walked up to the bandit. She's like, hey, I'm a Christian. I'm supposed to walk through. And they're like, okay, you're supposed to walk through. I'm like, man, Jedi mind trick. That was wild. And she had so many stories, but the other brief one was they are all the way to Mexico City. Now imagine at every place you cross the border, people want something from you. So that's money, or you work for them, or whatever. It's something. And so they get all the way to Mexico City, and they're out of money, completely out of money. And it's November, and it's getting cold. And so they don't know what they're going to do. They're just going to crash on the street somewhere. And a lady walks up to them and is like, hey, are y'all from Venezuela? And they're like, yes. She's like, I'm supposed to take you to my house. They're like, okay. So they go with this lady to the house, spend the night in her house, and it snowed 12 inches that night. And I'm like, man, this is the kind of faith. And so, we talk a lot about how we carry folks, right? And we do. We care for them so deeply, and we collaborate together and with other community partners and churches in all kinds of ways to move them forward. And we're committed to that. And yet they're the ones kind of carrying us. So I want to talk briefly about a couple of things though here is the kind of care that we do. So the care that we do is a care of just coming alongside and listening and hearing stories. And so sometimes, in a medical model, we're pushing to go really fast. And I'm always the voice on our team going, how about if we go at a human pace? In fact, how about we go at the pace of the people that we're coming alongside? Because that pace might be slower. It might sometimes be really fast, but how about we go at their pace? We're collaborative. So Border Patrol came to our city, and it was an instant, horrific moment. We were struggling to figure out what to do as it was coming. So we knew it was coming. So over the weekend, we're kind of going, what do we do? And so, but one of the things we did, we said, because of our care, we are going to be committed to these people, right? So the first thing is we were just so committed. We actually, in our medical clinic, there's a little front glass vestibule area. And we were like, we're not letting anybody in beyond that. So I'm literally, I put my desk in that front little glass area, and I was like, they're going to have to come through me. Now, I'm not saying that I'm going to stop them. I mean, they're all bigger than me and they have weapons and I don't have weapons. So, except for these guns. So anyway, every day I walk in the clinic and I tell people I can't come in here, y'all. It says no weapons. But they're like, come in anyway. Okay. After they laugh for a while. So we're in this moment and we're just we're committed to standing with, and we're going to do that. But we knew we couldn't do that ourselves. And so immediately, because here's what flipped. We have 30, 40, 50 people come to our clinic every day. And that flipped immediately to 30, 40, 50 home visits a day. And because we collaborated with churches and other partners, we were able to do that within 24 hours. Within 24 hours of our knowing what was happening, we were out delivering food and medicine to families. And it's not like we can take credit for it. It's that is what I'm saying. It's we need 4 friends. We need a team. And so that's how it worked. So we carry people, we hopefully move them forward. But as I've already alluded to, they also carry us. Oscar has been such an encouragement to me so many times, and shown up. He showed up at our ministry center one day with a cake because he knew it was my birthday, and he brought his whole family and we celebrated together. Ruth has carried me like no other. I mean, she calls me her pastor, but she's my pastor. She carries me. I called her day 2 of Border Patrol being in the city, and obviously she's vulnerable. She doesn't have the documentation to be there. She's applying for asylum, but we know that that's not even accepted always right now. And so she's very vulnerable at this moment. And I call her and she's like, Pastor Mark, it is going to be okay. God is in control. God is bigger than this. God will outlast this. Good is stronger than evil. And I'm like, I should be saying this to you, and yet you are the one carrying me. And that is so often true. The resiliency, the strength that these folks demonstrate time and time again gives me hope. And I'm always trying to carry them. I'm always trying to help them. They are always doing that more for me than I could ever do that for them. So I want to bring us to one more story. Brett's kind of mad because I get 2 gospel stories and he only got 1. But I do have 2 biblical names, John and Mark. So there you go. The road to Emmaus, you're familiar with this story. This story is after Jesus has been crucified, and the believers are kind of a mess. They don't know what to do. And so 2 folks are walking from Jerusalem to Emmaus, and they're downcast, they're sad, they're heartbroken. And so what happens as they're walking, though, right? We know this because we've read the passage. Jesus joins them. And so I think one thing to remember always in the work that we do, that as we accompany folks, guess who's accompanying us? Jesus. Matthew 8:20 is a reminder of that. Wherever 2 or 3 of you are together, I will be there in your midst. I always thought that's because Jesus knows that if 2 or 3 of us together, we're going to get in a fight. And so he's there to referee. But it's also he's there because he knows that we will face principalities and powers that are arrayed against us, that he will stand with us in that. And so he walks with them. There's lament, there's suffering, but Jesus walks with us. He gives them hope. Their hearts burn within them. And then he shows himself in the hospitality of breaking bread, which is also a sacramental picture of his presence really with us, which we're going to need to do this work. He is with us as we struggle against the powers and the principalities. Now remember that after the resurrection, that there starts to be little by little persecution in the church. And so there is always a resistance when we do things God's way. And if you feel like you're in the minority in the work that you do, and maybe you're even in the minority in the way the church is viewing some of these injustices that we see in our day, I was thinking of Sophia's story, like the Good Samaritan story. It's like, man, 2 out of 3 people didn't get it. So that means only 1 out of 3 people got how we're supposed to live. So if you're in the minority, just keep going. Don't give up. Keep trying. Because we can know that if we walk with those who are oppressed, who are suffering, first of all, they will bless us, but also Jesus will show up and be with us. And I'm going to give it back to Brett.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah. I want to conclude by looking at one final scriptural passage that means a lot to me. It's in Acts 16. When Paul and his companions are, as the Blues Brothers said, on a mission from God, but they are resisted. They're trying to go to Asia, and they're told no, and they're resisted by God from going to Bithynia. And then in the middle of the night, the Macedonian man appears to them in a dream and beckons them to come. So that's meant a lot to me in terms of my own vocational journey. And when I think I'm on a mission from God and I'm supposed to go to one place or another, and then the Lord beckons in a different direction. And so as my pastor, Goody Bell, said, they head to the first church in Europe, is founded in this former military town that, if you're from North Carolina, it's kind of like Fayetteville. It's not glamorous. It's not the Research Triangle. It's not the big bank city of Charlotte. It's a former military town. And it's there, not in the middle of the city because there aren't enough Jewish men for a synagogue, but they're down by the creek, as my pastor said, that the first church in Europe is founded. With Lydia, this Gentile woman who has to persuade Paul and his friends to stay with her. Do you really believe what you said at the Council of Jerusalem last chapter in Acts 15 about Gentile inclusion? And so it's in this down by the creek in this, in Fayetteville, with a Gentile woman that the church in Europe begins. And I have found that deeply compelling in my own sense of vocation about where to find and follow Jesus. And as I've been at CCHF the last few days to witness so many folks who are finding and following Jesus down by the creek, so to speak, is a deeply powerful and moving thing. So Paul then and his friends proclaim the good news of Jesus there in Fayetteville and Philippi, and they encounter this enslaved girl who, as if you're familiar with the passage, is prophesying. And finally, Paul casts out the demon. So another cosmic confrontation, like I was describing in Mark 5. And immediately the demon leaves her, and immediately the men who have been making money off of her are pretty upset because she no longer has the power of divinization the way that their prophet was bound up in demonic possession. Echoes what we were talking about with Mark 5 as well, and the folks there with the demonized man. So Paul and his friends disrupt the economic status quo, and they are immediately taken to the political authorities because this is not okay that the good news of Jesus would mess with business. And they are thrown in the jail. Paul doesn't appeal to his Roman citizenship. He just goes to jail. And I want to read from the passage there in Acts 16, these 5 verses, starting with verse 25. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly there was an earthquake so violent that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were open and everyone's chains were unfastened. This is, if you think about Jesus proclaiming release to the captives from the Isaiah scroll in Luke 4. Like here, the Spirit of the Lord is releasing them from their chains. When the jailer woke up and saw the prison doors wide open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, since he had supposed that all the prisoners had escaped. I want to return to that because I'm thinking about those Border Patrol agents that Mark was describing coming to Charlotte. But Paul shouted in a loud voice, "Do not harm yourself, for we are all here." And our friend and colleague Warren Kinghorn is working a book on Christian responses to suicide, and that verse is at its heart. Do not harm yourself, for we are all here. The jailer called for the lights, and rushing in, he fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them outside and said, Sirs, what must I do to be saved? A very different response than the townsfolk who asked Jesus to leave in Mark 5. And so Paul, this encounter, one, is made possible in the spirit of worship and like spiritual attunement that Paul and his friends found there in bondage. It's also made possible because Paul and his friends did not see the doors open and run out those doors. He said, do not harm yourself, for we are all here. And there's a contrast here between their fellow evangelist and disciple, Peter, who in Acts 12 is released from his bondage and kind of slinks out of the city by cover of darkness. And as my friend Sarah Jobe, who helps direct our prison ministry certificate at Duke, said, Peter disappears from the story of Acts after he does not stay to get his people, so to speak. In a contrast to how Paul and his friends stay in the jail after they're released and participate in the jailer's redemption and his household's redemption. So I know many folks now feel the weight of bondage and oppression and the awfulness of this world. And this passage, as we were talking in preparation for this, it really presses for me, what does it mean to be prepared, to be present to and participate in the liberation and salvation of folks who may be our jailers, or the folks who we may see on the other side of all sorts of issues. What might it mean to stay and say, don't harm yourself, we're all here, when they may realize when I might find myself realizing my own bound upness and complicity in the awfulness of this world? What might it mean for people to be present and ready to accompany me, and for me not to let the weight of that sin and shame drive me to despair? And so I'm thinking about when Mark was describing his friend Oscar on the front porch, saying, why do they hate us so much? What does it mean to spiritually prepare ourselves to witness to the good news of Jesus for folks who hate Oscar and folks like him? And I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that in Mark 5, Jesus tells the demonized man who's now in his right mind and clothed to stay and get your people. And here in Acts 16, Paul stays with the jailer, makes sure he doesn't harm himself. His whole household experiences salvation. And Paul commits to this path all the way to testifying to the good news of Jesus in the imperial court, because he does not seek to escape his bondage, but he lives into where the Lord has called him, not to Asia or Bithynia, but there down by the creek, in the path that sets him on, to witness to the good news of Jesus, the liberating news of Jesus, even as that presses him even more into a cruciform life in bondage himself in the Roman system. So I'm not exactly sure what that means for me or for any of us, but I find myself continually returning to this passage to imagine what Christian faithfulness today might mean for us and for all the good work that you are doing as well. So I think with that, I'll let Martha maybe frame any closing questions or comments.
Thanks. This, I'm realizing, listening it together, was a far-reaching presentation. Started out framing public health, realizing that there's a rich history of it. Christians have been and have been not a part of that over many centuries. We believe, and I think most people in this room believe, as Jocelyn said from the plenary on Friday night, that hope is a communal act, that we are in this together. And we can't assume this sense that a rising tide will carry everyone. We as believers in Christ are required, encouraged to go to the margins, to be in those places. And it also doesn't free us from paying attention to those who are in authority. doing community work is political by its nature, not in terms of parties, but in terms of breaking down the brokennesses of society to reach all, including the jailers, including those who might represent ICE. So I think that is what I'll end with. We have provided some tools that you might want to learn more about, thinking about the history of Christianity and how it's been tied up in communal health, thinking about the models given to us by Pope Leo and Gustave Gutierrez and others involved in liberation. TMC is a place where you can come study some of this with us. We would love that. There are both in-person and distance ways to do that. And I know that many, many people at CCHF are already in the margins doing this. And we're just grateful to bring some of this to you as a reminder. So with that, I will just leave a minute or two, perhaps, for any comments, questions, and then maybe I'll close us in prayer. Yes, sir.
I think it's interesting how you guys talk about Mark 5 and doing, because right before what Jesus did is might be kind of similar to the situation we are all. You guys are all being almost a story.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
The storm that I'm missing that story, but it's a storm in itself. But all I'm saying,
It is.
geopolitical climate. I think it's hard to not look out and do like this cycles and run to Jesus saying, I'm okay, like wake up, homeless children.
That's right.
When Jesus wakes up and says, why are you afraid?
Yeah. Right.
What is this grounding with this parallel? Bring right that we learn this morning, theology is also that. Yes, we know we shouldn't be afraid. Yes,
Right.
we know we should have faith. But what's the grounding that you guys go from each day we're praying for?
Yeah. Thank you for painting that wider picture. We all need four crazy friends. We need the people around us in our lives that can tell us the story when we've forgotten or we're frightened. And figuring out who those folks are, and how we carry one another is a critical part of this long-term journey, for sure. Yes.
I'm just reminded of the past. I'm encouraged by the witness of Christians over the centuries who have been in really difficult times. And so Basil of Caesarea in the 4th century kind of we remember him as a defender of orthodoxy and of the Nicene Creed. He was a bishop who lived in the middle of a lot of conflict, both imperial and within the church itself. And he has this meditation at the end of his short book on the Holy Spirit, thinking about that time of church conflict and theological controversy as like a naval battle where it gets really confusing. We're trying to do our best, but we've fired on our friends and wounded people we care about. And I think about that scene of a naval battle and ecclesial conflict. Basil founded the first hospital, the first Christian hospital. He was a defender of the Nicene Creed. We remember him for all these glorious things, but it was messy and murky and hard, and he hurt friends that he cared about. And it's somehow out of that maelstrom that the Holy Spirit has been at work over the centuries, bringing forth the Lord and giver of life, brought forth faithful witness out of the maelstrom. The Lord who was there snapping in the bottom of the boat is the Lord of time, and who the Spirit who hovered over the waters is the Spirit hovering over the waters of chaos that we might feel now. And I take great comfort in the witness of Christians over the centuries who have muddled their way through, and now in hindsight we see how present the Lord was with them in their confusing naval battle-like moments to bring about faithfulness.
Yeah. I think that's a good word to end on, unless anyone else has something. Okay. Let me just close us in prayer. Lord God, thank you that you have created us to need each other, to move towards each other, that our flourishing is tied up in each other and in you. Thank you for the gifts of this conference, a time that we can share and weep and learn and hold hope. Hope is a communal act. Bless us as we go out, as we hear our next workshop speakers, as we stay steady in you. Help us to watch for the places that you are winking at us and drawing us closer. In your name, amen. I'm supposed to remind you to fill out this. We'd love any feedback. Thank you.